I think that's the main driver to take those benchmarks from the lab to real life. The lab is very repeatable. That's important when you try to optimize a specific use case. But real life is very important because that's what really matters. People do very crazy things. So we had to make our lab a bit more crazy. That's where we realized no matter what we'll build, there's always going to be another use case.
Hi, I'm Eden Fulgo, and you're listening to How It's Tested, a monthly series where we discuss great products, how they're tested, and other stories from the testing community, featuring interviews with tech leaders, founders, testing experts, and creators. How It's Tested is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or if you would like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at TeamMobot. That's TeamMobot. On today's episode, I am speaking to Yechezkel Rabinovich, the co-founder and CTO at Groundcover. Hey, Chez, thank you so much for joining me on the How It's Tested podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
So, really excited to dive into what you've built with Groundcover and with Flora today. I think we have a really exciting story to kind of share based on what you and your team have been hard at work building. But I think maybe something that is always helpful to orient our audience here is kind of telling us a little bit about how you co-founded Groundcover and maybe your background before you joined or started Groundcover.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a developer for 15 years now, usually around Linux kernel embedded. In the last 8 years, I also worked in the high-scale backend data processing. I actually had a one particular task. I had to analyze a data pipeline we had in my previous employee, and we just couldn't figure out what's the problem, right? So we started instrument all the classic observability approaches. We started SDK instrumentation and Prometheus metrics and all that, and took us months, and we didn't solve the problem. It was really, really hard. And eventually, the bill came of those observability platforms, and we had to remove all those instrumentations and all those metrics because it was too expensive. So I talked to Shahar, which is my best friend, and we figured out something is definitely broken here. And we founded Groundcover, which is the first frictionless observability. Frictionless in terms of eBPF. Not a lot of people know about that. It's a kernel feature that allows you to instrument your application without changing your code. So you can think about it as a sandbox in the kernel that allow you to inspect applications when they're running. So you can deploy it instantly on 100 nodes cluster, and it just works. And it's very, very safe in terms of the kernel and very fast. So that was our first goal. And the second goal was to reduce cost. So we are basically using a lot of cool sampling algorithms that allow us to decouple volume, the data volume, from the pricing, which is very compelling to our customers because they don't need to worry about log lines and their costs, right? No one really knows how many log lines they're going to have at the end of the month. We don't care. It's the same price. So that's the story of Groundcover in short.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see, more engineering teams adopting Groundcover. And it sounds like, you started to approach this problem to solve because you personally experienced the inconvenience of instrumenting all the logging and then having to remove it because of the price tag. Do you feel like over the next few years, there is going to be a change in perspective around either the way that these observability platforms are going to price, whether they're going to start thinking along the same lines that you and the Groundcover team are thinking, or how do you think the end user engineer is thinking about this? And it sounds like, just to make sure I understand correctly, a lot of the pricing right now is around number of lines, and just there's been no way to optimize or streamline that previously.
Yeah, I think the whole market is kind of broken in a way because, you have huge public companies built around this pricing model. And basically, they treat themselves as a data lake, right? It's like if you want some kind of big query or data warehouse for observability. And the problem is that with that approach, you're not aligned with the customer because the customer don't really want just to query 20 billion of logs. The customer wants to answer what's the problem, what happened, what changed. And if we don't have any incentive to make this process more efficient, so we're just going to encourage our customers to send more and more data, if you like, garbage data. And everybody wins besides the customer, besides us, developers that actually want the data to be efficient and in reasonable price. So I think it's definitely going to change. This is not a modern approach to how we want to consume service. This is not correlated to business metrics. Log lines can be added accidentally. One developer added one log line in a hot path, didn't know how bad it's going to be. Boom, 20% increase in their observability platform. What about the company? Did it change? The status of the business change? No, it didn't. So I think we're going to see more and more companies adopting it. I think we're already seeing companies like Honeycomb trying to explain those kind of changes for the last few years. And I think recent technology changes actually make it a lot more approachable and accessible. So yes, I think we're going to see other vendors starting and changing their pricing model.
So you guys are very focused right now on eBPF, which, is this up and coming technology that the IT industry is really starting to rally around. Are there any other alternatives or other options besides eBPF that the industry is considering, or you feel like this is kind of where the future is going?
That's a good question. I think eBPF is one way to collect data. It's very easy, very efficient, but it's not the only way. You can always instrument your application. And if you instrument your application, it's going to be a lot harder, but you can have a lot more nuances. When you instrument your application, you can decide you want to add some specific attributes that you have in your code. Maybe you want to add a label about your customer or something that is not reflected in the API. So I think instrumentation and eBPF going hand to hand together is the way to go. You probably want eBPF to cover your entire environment, and you probably want hotel instrumentation to pinpoint very specific points that you really, really care about in terms of business metrics. So the combination between the two of those are amazing, and all of our customers are actually adapting it, and we can also see how much of their production is instrumented and help them get to the 20, 30, 40% that they actually need. But it's a slow process. Instrumenting your application can be a very slow process.
And so I know that with the solution and sort of your flagship platform, I think it's called Flora, right?
Yeah.
How are you guys building that observability agent? Tell me a bit more about what is Flora, who's using it, and what's kind of been the adoption so far.
Yeah, so Flora is our sensor, our eBPF sensor. We deployed as daemon set on the cluster, on the Kubernetes cluster, and instantly you get all the data. We're talking about 2 minutes. You get all the APIs going in and out your cluster. It was a very hard beginning because we kind of needed to build the framework that allow us to add more and more protocols and more runtimes to support. The technologies today are very wide, and we're seeing 20 type of databases, 7 messaging queues, different DNS protocols and versions, and encryption libraries. So we had to build this framework to allow us to build fast and to grow with our customers. And that's basically what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that we maintain our SLA in terms of how many CPU and memory are we consuming, and still move fast and add more and more support to new protocols for bigger, newer customers.
That's awesome. And so when did you guys launch Flora, and or are you in the process of launching it? Because I also know you co-founded this startup a couple of years ago. Is that right?
Yeah. So at the beginning, we experiment with open source tools. Why not take someone else's code that already is doing that? But when we tried it in production in our first customers, we saw that the performance hit that we got was not good and we couldn't make it production ready. So we figured out we have to rebuild the entire thing from scratch and redo it. So we released Flora last April. Yes, a year ago. And from then, we kept adding more and more features. We actually improved our performance over the last year a lot. But we already started with kind of benchmarking Flora to against all other sensors that currently were in the market, just to make sure we are on the right track, right? We want to make sure our theory about how to make it faster, more efficient, is going to hold in real life scenarios. So since then, we constantly optimizing, constantly improving hot path in our code. Because at the end of the day, we want to support huge clusters with huge volume data. You can imagine that, especially in some industries like gaming industry and ad tech industry, we're seeing dozen million APIs per second. And we need to ingest all that, pass it, correlate with metrics, understand baselines, detect errors, send to databases, all of that. And all that happen at the node level of our customers. So we don't want to interfere with them. So a lot of hard work in terms of performance in there.
When you're engaging with a new engineering team or a new customer, because I know you had mentioned like you can basically go head to head with Datadog or OpenTelemetry or I think New Relic as well. I saw in sort of the blog post that you guys wrote about kind of like Flora's capabilities. Like, do you actually engage with customers where they can be using both, for example, Datadog and Flora side by side, and you're able to demonstrate like very obvious efficiency and improvement compared to that? Or how do engineering teams kind of like get to know Flora, assuming they are using like an existing observability platform already?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It happens a lot where we're talking to an engineering team, they're using New Relic, and they say, all right, let's run Groundcover. It's easy. And a few minutes later, they can see head-to-head comparison between their New Relic agent or SDK and Flora, Groundcover sensor. What also interesting is that they can also, once they remove the New Relic SDK or Datadog SDK, they also see another beneficial about their latency decrease. So they can also measure things after they remove the instrumentation. And most of the people that we talk to already know that. They already had this kind of trade-off. They knew that it's going to happen when they added this instrumentation, but they didn't have any choice. So they come to us saying, hey, we heard we can reduce this overhead with you guys. Can we check it out? So that's pretty fun, right?
Yeah. And I can imagine also for kind of like this technical user, this technical buyer and decision maker, when they are making the decision to adopt a new tool, everyone is very quantitative and data driven. And to be able to do the side by side and just see a direct comparison and see how Flora is better, I can imagine like it's a no brainer in terms of a decision at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Look, it's not an easy transition to observability platform. That's for sure. You'll have all your dashboards in it. You have your alerts. It's not fun. It's not easy. We know that. We do make it a little bit more fun. So eBPF, we removed all your instrumentation needs, right? So that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you probably have more data now because you didn't instrument your application. So also seeing new things kind of give you a bit more motivation about why proceeding with that. And when we started Groundcover, we knew we were going to have a problem with transition components from different tools. So we built the entire platform to support open source interfaces. So we integrate easily with Grafana. All our metrics are PromQL compatible. We're using open source stack to let people see what we're using and leverage it with their own tools and knowledge. That also helps. So if you're already, because we're seeing a lot of companies using Datadog and New Relic, but they also use Grafana to consolidate all those data. So those dashboards can be inputted in seconds. So it's not easy, but it's definitely worth it not just in terms of the pricing, also from the value you get, because you literally see everything. And the most scary thing with testing is what you don't know, you don't know, right? But those APIs that you don't know what happened in your cluster. Those are the scary ones. So yeah, you don't have those with well covers. That's a huge factor.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, I the reason we originally got connected to do this podcast episode was because I heard that as you were developing Flora, you had to put together a pretty rigorous and robust test bench and test process. So tell me a little bit about that. Like setting up that test bench was something you decided as a team to do before the launch, after the launch, and what is the process for testing?
Yeah, that's interesting because most of the company comes from the security aspect, security industry. And when you develop sensors for security, anti-malware, antivirus or endpoint protection, you need to face 100 variations of OS systems, different Windows versions, different kernel drivers, all that. So basically, in every security company, you have a lab that kind of ran automation on hundreds of devices with different configurations. You probably know about that a little bit more than me. So we all build this kind of labs in our history. When we started Flora, we knew that we're gonna have that lab, but one crucial feature that we can now use Kubernetes. So we basically created this kind of lab, a virtual lab that spin up 20 clusters with variation of workloads and different kernel versions. So you basically spin it up in 10 minutes. You run your deployment, your benchmark. We also used test suites like K6 and obviously Groundcover just to measure the API latency and all that. And that goes down after the test and we have results. And we did that for every PR that we wanted to. So slow process because, it's a 20-minute session, but very, very efficient in terms of where are our sweet spots? Is it different, specific kernel, specific library, specific protocol? We had all those metrics, synthetic metrics, and we could definitely find another hotspot to solve. Having said that, we also knew that no matter what we're going to do in the lab, out there it's going to be a bit wild. Also, that's a very unique approach that I think we took. Flora sending home a lot of telemetry in terms of metrics, a lot. And I'm talking about, we have probably 100 million metrics ingested in a stack every 30 seconds to analyze very different workloads, very different cloud providers, different machine types. So even though we pass the benchmark, we also constantly, every release that we do, and it's usually once a day, we 3-4 hours, like we have very addicted users that actually deploy Groundcover 20 seconds after a new release. So we already have metrics and benchmarks on that version. So we kind of have a report that we built that show us previous and current and where are the hotspots. And I think that's the main driver to take those benchmarks from the lab to real life. So you have to have them both because the lab is very repeatable. So that's important when you try to optimize a specific use case. But real life is very important because that's what really matters. So we use those two and leverage that.
So I know a part of your test setup is you have to simulate thousands of requests per second, representing realistic usage of Flora. Did your original assumptions, like before launch of what you needed to test for and design for, how did that change like post-deployment, post-launch? Like, did you have to change the test setup? Any insights or anything that you learned, after actually getting a lot more adoption and ramp up from users?
Yes, sure. So when we started, we took common websites that serve APIs, and we thought that's probably represent how people will build their APIs internally. So we we kind of scrape for 20, 30 websites that offer APIs, and we kind of realized the patterns and kind of created that. But you're surprised to see or to know that people do very crazy things. So, we saw Redis commands with 30K objects getting like standard. We thought that's not how you're supposed to use Redis, but that's what happened. We saw we saw 15 megs of HTTP requests being uploaded frequently. So we had to make our lab a bit more crazy after we saw that. But that's where we realized no matter what we'll see, no matter what we'll build, there's always going to be another use case. So at that moment, we went all in on the metrics from our sensor itself. So now we currently, you can imagine that we have 100,000 sensors sending us metrics, telemetry all the time, profiles and metrics that allow us to slice and dice CPU bottlenecks with business metrics of amount of products and what type of products and what size of the products in terms of percentiles. So it helps us and the product team to understand what are the weaknesses and if we care about it. Maybe it's fine that you're not good when it's an SQL that inserted 20 gigs once an hour. Maybe it's fine. So we understood that lab is going to be very limited to a product that capture production environments in a lot of different use cases.
Do you think that as engineering teams adopt Flora or adopt more observability platforms like Flora, that there's going to be sort of a reckoning in terms of people cleaning up their hygiene or engineering best practices more? Like, how do you see that evolving over time? And I mean, I've looked at like the logos and the customers that you work with. Some of these are like top tier companies and firms like, VIA, I think I saw, and Geosite and other companies like that. Like, how have they sort of changed like engineering team behavior, product team behavior as a result of implementing Flora or Groundcover's technologies?
I don't think we're after making the code cleaner in the world, right? I don't believe that code should be always performant or should be always fast, because it depends on what you're trying to do in terms of business metrics. But what I do believe is us as engineers, we want data to take decisions by it. And I think before Flora, you could have a lot of assumptions, right? You think, oh, those are the bottlenecks. It's a very big HTTP request. And people will say, that makes sense. But now you can prove it. Now you can see it. And that's like, no, it doesn't correlate with payload size. Interesting. Maybe it's a specific user that's filtered by header. Yeah, I can see it's very different type of customers having different latencies. Okay, that's interesting. Now, and let you dig deeper. I think that's what we're trying to bring. Like, first of all, is bringing all the data in a very economic way. And the second is to let you analyze the data in a very efficient and modern way. You don't want just to run SQL queries. It takes time. You want context. You want to be able to slice and dice groups and separate them by values and visualize that in different graphs and to get to the insight that you're really after. And we're definitely changing when we are deploying our platform for our customers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Switching gears a little bit, I'm curious, what is your philosophy when it comes to building and scaling your engineering team and sort of the way that you resource the team to build Flora and to build other tooling around Flora? We talked a lot about the underlying platform, and there's also this like simulated environment that the team is investing in. Do the same engineers who are building the platform also write tests and sort of design the testing protocols? Or are there different roles on the team for engineering? Like, how do you think about building and scaling your team?
First of all, I think to start something like Flora, like to incubate this kind of new technology or new concept, I think you need to be very cautious about the number of people that you put on it. You need to protect those people in terms of focus and context. So I think 3 people is the right number for a long time. I mean, you probably want to get to the first version with 3 people max working on it constantly. More than that, you're going to have them separate the task into logical units. And it's not what you want to do at the beginning of it. You want everyone to have the entire context because everything is related. You don't want to get into this local maximums. So third of all is the number of people. Obviously, it's the people themselves. You need people you need engineers that can think about very wide spectrum of the problem, because the problem could be an algorithm that can solve something, but it also can be solved by another tool or a library or tech stack that you want to choose. So you want experienced people, and you want to give them all the context they need, and if it's possible, even lock them in a room and don't change them for a long time. But on the other side, you want to expose the product as soon as you have something. And to be honest, the first version with Flora, and it was prior version 1, we only shared with our bravest customers. We said, look, this is not really ready. We need to test this. We are running it in production, but you probably shouldn't. But if you are up to it, let's do it. And we can do it for a day or two and collect metrics, collect insights, collect bugs and feedback from you guys and get back to you. And you're going to earn from the ability to impact on the project long term because you're going to be the first users. We did that for 3 months, maybe, experimenting with beta users. And that time we already had customers, paying customers, that it was really hard to change the engine behind it. But we had a full support from our customers to push it once they saw the improvement. And I think that was the secret sauce. Like they saw that we are living up to the promise that we told them.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I think in these early days, the early adopters, the customers that are sort of fully bought into the vision, like they're patient, they're willing to be design partners, they're willing to give feedback. Similarly, at my company, Mobot, we are also building tools for engineers and product folks and QA folks. Those folks, they have an understanding of what it takes to build a real solution that solves a problem. And they like being able to participate and be informed as a part of that process.
Yeah, I really like working on products for engineers. It's something very magical to relate to the person that you're actually selling the product. It's almost like you don't really sell it. It's like you celebrate it together.
Yeah.
You both get excited about it.
Yeah, I feel that way as well. I guess in terms of like the future of Groundcover, you have a number of customers and partners already, and the platform is really taking off and there's been more adoption. Where are you guys going from here? Like, what do you think Groundcover will look like in, the next 2, 3, 5 years?
Oh, wow. The first year we focused on getting the data. And now we're really focused on the user experience. So how do you make sense from all that data in a way that will be very, very delightful for our users? Next year, will be a year where we expand the platform to ECS, EC2, basically any machine that you're running the cloud. Because our customers, usually they're heavily based on Kubernetes, but they have those EC2s running somewhere. They have some ECS tasks. We already start doing that. So we already ingesting data from serverless and CloudWatch and other integrations, but we want to double down on that. We want to be a one-stop shop for everything, all your observability data. And also, we want to change the way monitoring and investigation works. Nowadays, monitoring is like, just pick a number, right? How many active time series you should have, or how many inserts to the database you should have. And to be honest, like once you've onboarded another customer, that number is already obsolete. And the way we build dashboards and alerts are kind of the same way we did it 10 years ago. You build dashboard every time you have a problem, and then you have 100 of dashboards where they're all doesn't fit the new problem that you're trying to solve. So we are going to innovate in that field as well, because once you have all that data, it makes sense to also take it to the next step and offer a new investigation flow or root cause analysis a bit more modern.
I'm really looking forward to continuing to follow the journey and, following your blog, following just like all of the company updates in the upcoming quarters. I think there's a lot of need in the market for what you guys are offering, and it totally makes sense to expand. I know into EC2 and some of these other instances. I think that's going to be a great extension to the platform.
Thank you. Amazing.
Yeah. Really appreciate you taking the time to join me on the podcast. We are always looking for, a diverse range of different engineering teams building different products, different platforms, different ideas. And it was really interesting to hear about your unique approach to building Flora and also the testing and the process of developing and launching it. I think a lot of our audience is going to find that really interesting as well. Anything else that you'd like to share while we have you here on the podcast?
No, I think if you didn't experience eBPF yet, you should. It's magic. It's beautiful. So you can check our platform. You can check other platforms or some kind of tutorials of how to get started. But it's very, very impressive framework that I think every developer should experiment.
That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter @TeamMobot. That's TeamMobot. This show is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com.